Secondly, let me suggest to you, this is an idea that I've been trafficking a bit as I've traveled around the state of Indiana. I know that we got some encouragement to consider even higher office, but as my family and I reflected on our future, we just feel like our calling is closer to home, so we've been traveling around Indiana. And I'll tell the friends in this room that we are seriously considering running for governor of the state of Indiana in 2012. It's got me to start thinking, as you see what's happening in states all across the country, there's another part of this limited government story that I don't think is quite engaged yet. And I want to submit it to you and try it out for the first time out west here on you all, and leave it to your good offices at the Pacific Research Institute to think about. And that is this business of renewed federalism. This business of restoring the proper balance between the powers reserved the federal, or the powers enumerated to the federal government and those reserved to the states and to the people under the Constitution of the United States. I mean, I honestly think that what we're seeing across this country, in places like Indianapolis, in places like Madison, Wisconsin, in places like New Jersey and elsewhere, is it seems like there's almost a rumbling from deep within America's past that is rejecting the centralization of power. And a proper understanding of American history, and I've begun to delve kind of deeply into, my background is in constitutional law and in American colonial history, this enmity toward consolidation and centralization of power is something that goes very, very deep in the American experience. And I think as people see the fecklessness and the lack of leadership and runaway federal spending under both political parties, expansions of the power of the federal government, there's something in recent years that is beginning to bubble up from the heartland, and I think it takes the shape of federalism. Now, let me suggest to you that this is not a new idea. One of your former governors, famously the 40th President of the United States, had the same idea. It's fascinating to me that on the first page, in the third paragraph of his first inaugural address, Ronald Reagan spoke not about the Soviet threat, spoke not about the need to get the economy moving again. Ronald Reagan's first statement as President of the United States to the American people was about federalism. He actually said in that speech that it was important to remember that the states created the federal government. The federal government didn't create the states. And he actually said it was time to demand. President Reagan actually said in that inaugural address, it was time to demand a proper recognition of the authority enumerated to the federal government and that reserved to the states and to the people. In fact, 1 year later, interestingly, and I'll bring it closer to home in Indiana, on the 8th of February, 1982, it's about a year and a month later, President Reagan shows up in Indianapolis at the State House for the specific purpose of giving an address on what he would call the new phase of the American experiment. The new phase of the great American experiment. It was federalism. President Reagan came to our General Assembly in Indianapolis. I got a copy of the speech, Chris. I just had it. Somebody gave it to me, an old legislator, and a picture of him standing there in the well of our General Assembly. And President Reagan came to Indianapolis to announce a presidential commission to restore federalism. And he proposed in Indianapolis that day in 1982 40 different federal programs in areas of health and human services and transportation and education that would be sent back down to the state governments with cutting the red tape and sending all the revenues associated with them. And that was the table ante, if you will. And President Reagan challenged Indiana and the other 49 states to step up and say what they'd be prepared to take on. And unfortunately, he got dial tone for it. I mean, literally, it went nowhere. I need to pull Attorney General Ed Meese aside sometime and have him give me the inside scoop on that. One has the impression, as you saw all of what was happening in the Reagan administration, that this was one speech the president just wanted to do, and they let him go get it out of his system in Indianapolis. But 30 years would pass. And what was missing in that moment was not the vision for restoring federalism. What was missing in that moment was the dynamic leadership at the state level that would possess both the competence and the courage to be able to take back from the federal government that which is rightfully theirs. And what was missing 30 years ago is emerging today. I mean, think about it. John Kasich in Ohio, Mitch Daniels in Indiana, Scott Walker in Wisconsin, Haley Barbour, Nikki Haley, Chris Christie. I mean, there's a whole new generation of leaders emerging all over this country that are demonstrating the confidence and the courage to be willing to do what needs to be done to put our fiscal house in order, not just in the short term, but to embrace a relimiting of the federal government's role. We will never solve the fiscal crisis facing our national government by cutting spending alone. We will only solve it by permanently reducing the scope of the federal government by embracing the 10th Amendment.